Almost all the marriages in my family have been arranged marriages. My mom's marriage to my bio dad was an arranged marriage, but it ended up in a messy divorce and him completely abandoning us before I was even born. My mom had a love marriage the second time, despite the disapproval of her family, and has been much happier with my stepdad than she probably would have ever been with my bio dad. Because of this, my mom has always been very adamant that she would not try to force us, my siblings and I, into arranged marriages despite what the rest of our family thought. I've been with my fiancé for 3 years now. We got engaged 2 months ago. He's met my parents and siblings, but as far as the majority of my extended family were concerned, I was single until 2 months ago. Early last year, my fiancé dropped me off home after work one day and my uncle was there. My uncle is the oldest sibling my mom has, so he's seen as the head of the family. He thinks he has a say in what the rest of us do. It was obvious my uncle was pissed, and he ended up grilling my fiancé, and I assume he met his standards. A lot of arranged marriages are about what both families can gain from one another, so he told my mom to get us married quickly. He wanted to make it look like we had an arranged marriage before the rest of our family found out. My mom ignored him and told us to keep dating if it's what we wanted. Over the past year, he's mentioned me getting married to my mom every single time he's spoken to her. Apparently, my uncle assumed just because he'd given the order that we were going to get married soon. He told my cousin, his daughter, that I had agreed to an arranged marriage, and because I had and she was older, she should agree to the match he'd found her. My cousin never mentioned this to me, but she did agree to marry the man my uncle found for her. They got married late last year. They haven't had a good marriage and my cousin is very unhappy. Her husband is incredibly controlling and hardly ever lets her go anywhere without him or a member of his family. Last week, she was over at my house when my fiancé came over to drop some of the clothes I'd left at his place over. When I told my family about my engagement, they all assumed it was an arranged marriage and I didn't bother clarifying because it really isn't anyone's business. You don't tend to do sleepovers if you're having an arranged marriage, so my cousin knew immediately it wasn't what she assumed. She started asking me questions about my relationship and I answered honestly. She got really angry at me and kept demanding to know why I didn't tell her about him. The thing is, I'm very close to this cousin, but I also know how our family is about dating and I didn't want my male cousins trying to strong-arm my fiancé. They've jokingly threatened this before. She pretty much blamed me for her arranged marriage and said she only agreed because she thought I was going to have one too, and if I had told her I had a boyfriend, she would have had the courage to stand up to her family. She hasn't spoken to me since. I do feel bad for her. I know how unhappy she is, but if she had mentioned what my uncle told her earlier, I would have clarified. I don't want this to be the end of our relationship, but I don't know what I can do to fix this. 2 years ago my house burnt to the ground after being struck by lightning. Thankfully it was during the day, so our 3 kids were at school and my husband and I were at work. We lost everything, but we were safe. It took almost 11 months for the insurance to pay out. The insurance covered 1 month worth of hotel stays, but after that we were made to fend for ourselves, and the only option we had was to move in with my SIL. She tells us we can have her spare room and her office space. Since she used neither of the rooms and her stipulations was we needed to purchase all of our own food and pay her $100 a week. By week 3 all of that changed. She then decides we need to pay her $250 a week and we can only use 1 room. So all 5 of us were crammed into the smallest room she had, which was the size of a glorified closet space and didn't even fit a twin bed and a small dresser. So we lived out of trash bags and slept on the floor for close to $1,000 a month some months and still had to purchase all of our own food, despite her claiming my children on her food stamps. She also had no bills outside of her land tax, $450 a year, electric and heating oil, which she hardly ever filled. So we were essentially paying her so she could do leisure activities. It was the worst 8 months of my life. 3 months ago my grandmother decided that she wanted to go to assisted living after a fall and transferred the deed of her house to me, and basically said it was mine now. It is a 5-bedroom farmhouse. My boys insist on sharing a room, so we have 2 extra bedrooms. Well, my sister-in-law lost her house last month due to not paying her land tax for several years and asked if her and her stepdaughter could stay with us until they get enough money to move down south. I said sure, 1 bedroom, $800 a month, and you have to buy and cook all your food separately because my daughter is vegan. She looked at me like I had 10 heads and said that she and her stepdaughter should not be made to share a room when there are 2 extra rooms, and stated she cannot afford a rent of $800 while purchasing all of her own food on top of it. I said, neither could we, but we managed to cram 5 people into a glorified closet space while you were getting $1,000 and food stamps. Take it or leave it. She decided to leave. I believe it started when I was around 6 years old. My parents often had friends over in the house. I didn't know they were polyamorous OFC. One day I was outside playing, got hurt, and when I ran inside caught my parents making out with some random guy. They told me they have other adults that they love and it's a completely normal thing. Me being a child just accepted that. They gave up being secretive and their partners would constantly be around, even joining on outings. I remember that on my 10th birthday they invited 3 of their partners, one of who I'd never seen before. And for the rest of the day my parents just withdrew from my party and hung out with them. I never saw them doing anything explicit again, but they would kiss their partners, hug them, make flirty comments. Something that would be normal between parents, but with many more people. Sometimes I came home from school and my parents were gone and there was some random adult in our house. Some of them seemed surprised that my parents even had a child. I always hated it, but since my parents had told me this was normal, I assumed many adults probably did similar things and that it's just an adult thing all kids hate. Later they had less partners and eventually seemed to stop. Not that I'd know for sure. I moved out with 17. I didn't think about it anymore. A year ago I started therapy, other reasons. As usual the topic of my upbringing came up and it brought back many feelings I wasn't aware of. I realized that although my parents were always good to me, I had never really felt close to any of them and still have a lot of resentment, that they made me feel like I had to compete for my parents' attention with random strangers. A while ago, I visited them and they told me they are going to take part in a documentary about polyamorous families, and that the producers would like to include interviews with the children. So they would love if I could agree and tell everyone that polyamory doesn't mess kids up. All my resentment bubbled up and I said that I cannot agree because I would not be able to say anything positive. My parents looked shocked. I had never brought this up before, and asked why, and I unloaded all, that I always felt pushed aside. We barely had any family time without strangers intruding. It turned into an argument and I became loud and yelled that the truth is it did me up and they shouldn't have had a child. My mother cried and my father said I should probably leave. So I left and was shaken up for the rest of the week, but also felt regret because I've never made my mom cry before. Later my father sent me a message that was like, "We are sorry you feel that way. Can we have a calm discussion about this soon?" Even though I tried to, it's like I can't reply. This argument brought something very emotional up in me. My unmarried partner lives with me and my children who are 7, 12, and 18. He has 2 children aged 5 and 13, but they live with their mother. We've had his kids over whenever we can and I enjoy it. However, they are very different to mine, who are all mostly easygoing and respectful. And it has been just the 4 of us for most of their lives. His kids are very loud, destructive, and demanding often. We made the adjustment, and eventually they started staying over every other weekend. But his son, Spencer, has become harder to deal with over time. He'll blow up if he doesn't get his way, insult my son if he loses a game, goes into the bedrooms and takes things without asking, complains about every meal we make, expects us to buy him whatever he wants no matter cost, and generally acts like a spoiled brat. He can also be sweet, of course. He's a child and he's not evil, but this is fairly constant. We don't let it slide, but I also want to give him benefit of the doubt. He's 13, he could be acting out for lots of reasons with a weird family dynamic, I'm sure. I try my hardest to help him feel comfortable and heard us, but his entitlement is rampant. It started to stress my kids out, and yesterday was the last straw for me. We were all about to go to the mall when my 12Y son asked if anyone had seen his birthday money. He had $100 saved, disappeared from his desk. Everyone, including Spencer, looked everywhere. Spencer even asked my son if he'd spent it and forgot, or if he'd left it at school, etc. Spencer then went outside to sit in the car alone and wait to leave. My partner went out to talk to him, which eventually led to getting him to empty his pockets. He had stolen the $100 to spend at the mall. My partner told him off, texted his mom about it and told me, then gave it back to my son. Quietly furious, we went out as planned after a talk with Spencer as to not ruin the day for the other kids. He didn't seem to feel guilty at all, even asked us to get him a $120 jacket while out. Once they were back at their mom's, I told my partner I don't want Spencer in the house anymore, at least for now. I do love his kids, and I don't want them to not see their dad. My partner has a house he doesn't use, so I suggested on those weekends we take the kids there for now. Then when any of mine aren't feeling it, they can go home and we can get some quality time, and so his kids don't have to share his attention as much. He thinks this is dramatic, an overreaction. I've told him I'm open to other ideas but won't budge from my stance. I don't want my kids feeling like they need to guard their space or to be uncomfortable in their own home. My youngest has autism and gets overstimulated with them around sometimes. He gets along W/5Y/O but needs breaks. My 12Y/O is quite anxious and 18Y/O has bipolar disorder. They're introverted, home is their safe haven and weekends are the only real free time they have. But I also don't want to be unfair to his kids.